I'm not normally teaching in here the last few weeks, so how long do I wait for it to quiet down? Another 10 minutes? Yeah.
Oh, what's happening to our
Kind of like
code?
youth group. Well, if I think everybody in here knows me, but if you don't, my name is Mike Richards. I'm the family life pastor. And back last, when was it, Bob?
January of 2014.
Yeah, last January, a year and a quarter ago, is when we started to meet and talk about this. So it's neat to see this come to fruition. Well, I haven't been able to be in here. I'm glad that Angie is helping us with the videoing of it, and we'll make that available for people too. So if you missed some of the sessions, it'd be good for us to evaluate as we go forward. Let me just open with a word of prayer, and then I'm going to invite Bob to come up and start us off with the devotion on Peter. Lord, I just thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for the privilege that we have to meet together and to discuss what it means to leave a legacy. I pray that as we interact, as we discuss together, Lord, that you would just use the knowledge and the wisdom from this group and the privilege that we have just to bounce off of each other in creativity. And I ask that you would cause us to look to you. We just ask that you would watch over this entire time. Pray be with Bob right now as he comes and shares, and that you would especially be with Pastor Brett and Laura as they're away celebrating their anniversary. Give them safe travels and bring them back soon. In your name. Amen. Bob.
First thing I'm going to do is pass around a couple books here, and just take a look at these. This one is just one word, contentment. And you can have contentment in virtually any stage of life and any situation. And so it's really worth taking a look at. It's an extremely well-written book. Richard Swansky from Menominee, Wisconsin. Here's the second book that is put out by, that Tom Cairns told me about. And it's Why the Church Needs Bioethics. It's a very hard read. I mean, it's actual cases of medical issues, but really worth the time to take a look at, and especially look towards the back, the last chapters 8, 9, and 10. So I'm going to send these two both around and just let people take a look at it, and I'll gather them at the end. Today we're going to take a look at Peter. I can really identify with Peter. He's, and for many reasons, Peter was a businessman. He had a successful business that he was running. He was a fisherman. And Galilee was the source of a large fishing industry in biblical times. And Peter was part of it. Not only did he run a business, but he ran a successful business. He was successful to the point where he had employees. So that's how I made my business in sales. So that's why I identify with Peter. Peter's got a lot of really good personality traits. When you look at him, you realize that he's outgoing. He's just a natural leader. He's willing to take risks. He's willing to be impulsive and do bold moves. He's very confident in himself and his own abilities. We would call a very positive mental attitude. That's what we call it today. I worked for a man that was similar to Peter and I went to work for him in 1983, and I've always marveled at him. His name was Dale Norgren, and he just was such a special man. He's an entrepreneur. And just one of those guys that you don't meet many of them, but very confident, the kind of guy that says, here's where I'm going, follow me. And you would follow him because he was so confident and he knew what he was doing. And he led, he owned the company I worked for, and it was just a delight to work for him. And I imagine that Peter was very much the same way. Now, Peter has some shortcomings also that tend to trip him up, and that's the flip side of his personality. Number one, he's got a lot of confidence in himself and his abilities. Now, that's good, but it can also get you in a lot of trouble, and it does. Peter will not take time to think things through very thoroughly. He will act immediately. And here again, you see this getting him into trouble many times. And you've all read about Peter over the years, so you know the different things I'm referring to. Peter also has the willingness and ability to use violence. We see that in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he drew a sword and cut the ear off of one of the slaves there. His greatest failure is during the crucifixion of Jesus, when he denies him 3 times. But I think the thing I like about Peter the most is simply this. Peter changed, and what you see is prior to Christ's crucifixion, you see 1 Peter, and you see when Christ brings him back and restores him to ministry, you see a really different guy from that point forward, and it's just hope for everybody, and hope for me that Jesus can take somebody, he can change him and use him. And this is what we see. When Christ reaffirmed his call, Peter lost his confidence in himself. But he still had confidence, but now it was in Jesus. His boldness wasn't in himself, it was in Christ. His ability to speak, he would take time to think things through better before he spoke. And he now was not afraid of men. That was the thing that got him in trouble in the crucifixion time, was that he was afraid of what men would think. Now, he's so bold. And we see that when he's in front of the Sanhedrin more than once, that he will just go out and speak very, very boldly. Peter writes 2 books that are named after him, 1st and 2nd Peter. The last thing that we talk about with Peter is that at the end of his life, read 2nd Peter. It's a really interesting read, the whole book, because it's written a couple years before he dies, and it really looks at his entire life. Peter's ministry lasted approximately 35 years. So you get a really good snapshot of a life of someone that was following Christ and being a disciple. The last thing that I would say about Peter that I find amazing is that when he was at the end of his life, he was sentenced to be crucified, and he decided he wanted to be crucified upside down. And I just think how much worse that must have been, even than being crucified vertically. And so I just find that amazing. But read 2 Peter, you'll find it a great read and a great snapshot of Peter.
So he was mentioning the books of 1st and 2nd Peter. Does anybody know what one of the key themes is in those books? Dom? Key themes? Yeah. Persecution and suffering. See a lot of orange today. If you didn't hear, the plea was to wear orange in honor of those who are suffering and being persecuted throughout the world for their faith. So it's kind of like a statement to be made. I was not in the service last week. I was down in Rochester with the teens, but I guess that was something that Pastor Brett brought up last Sunday. So I'm going to send this around for attendance. If your name's not on there, I see that there's some people added theirs at the bottom. That's great. And I'm putting 2 pens because I never know if any of the pens around here work. Wow. And I left my notes somewhere. Are they back there by you, Todd? Right here? Up in front? Oh, there they are. I'm a little scatterbrained today, so I've been running a lot of directions. The theme that I get to focus on today is legacy, what that means. If you look up the word legacy, some of the definitions that are there is that which is left for those who follow. Anything handed down from an ancestor or predecessor. So, if you think about that, let's start out by just asking, what are some things that have been handed down to you? What's some legacy things that have been handed down by people that went before you. What do you value that's been handed on?
Example of a Christian life.
Okay, good. Example of a Christian life. What else? Bill?
Belief in how effective prayer is.
Okay, prayer. And so there's the spiritual aspect of what's handed down to us. And that's the Hebrews, those that have gone before us. What about more tangible, practical things for our material world? What's Pastor?
A work ethic.
Okay, a work ethic. Good. So we have character aspects as well that are handed down. Yeah.
Giving when you don't have a lot to give.
Good. Those are both character points. So we've got the spiritual, we've got the personal character.
Natural abilities. Sometimes you will inherit a natural ability of your father.
Yeah.
My dad was a mechanic, and I inherited that, but my son did not.
Okay. Things that get passed on genetically through just
He was wired that way.
wired that way. Yeah. Yes.
I'm much more materialistic.
Good. Go ahead.
I have rings that I inherited, one from my mother and one from my mother-in-law,
Okay.
that I cherish.
What do you? That's another good word. Cherish. Things that we cherish. What do you cherish? Go ahead.
From my father, I learned the love of God's creation. And we'd be walking, and he'd be saying to me, Bonnie, look over there. Look at that little animal. Where, Daddy? You know, and everywhere we go, and I think, wow. And that, to me, is one of the greatest joys I have in life, even to this day.
Appreciation of God's creation.
Absolutely.
Great. What else? And it can be anything. What is it that God has blessed you with that you are touched by? Yeah.
Kindness. I'm fascinated how that can be used in everyday life. I have my grandfather who passed on to me, Bill, be kind to the enemy prisoners you take. Just remember that God loves them just as much as He loves you. And sometimes I'm driving along and some guy will cut me off or this or that. And, you know, I haven't put my button in to rip his wheels off yet. So, but instead I think, don't be quiet. God loves that man or that lady just as much as He loves you.
Good. Has anything been passed on that you're hoping to pass on to the next generations coming? Yeah.
For my parents, faith and responsibility,
Okay.
being faithful to do things you should.
Good. What else?
Serving others.
Okay.
I got my grandfather's Bible.
How many of you have something like that that's been passed on? A ring, a Bible, something that has been held in the family? Yeah. Tom, you worked at the national office with archives. And you get all sorts of things in from the Evangelical Free Church. So is it important for us to hang on to and pass on for those who come after us?
Yeah, really. And some of the stuff I see, like from our early Free Church leaders from way back, J.G. Prinsell and L.J. Peterson and so forth, some of their Bibles, some of their books, the Greek New Testament, this kind of thing, which has remained in the family for a while, and then somebody gave it to us, and we're able to keep it then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first started to date Danny and we got married, I never met her grandparents. Her grandparents died when she was early in college. Her grandmother died when she was younger. Her grandfather was a pastor in Tennessee. And I still remember we'd go down with Danny's parents to where Bristol is where he was from. And her dad would show us around the town. And there was a youth center outside of this little bitty church that the family wasn't even at anymore, but it had the Boyle name on the outside because her grandfather had started it. When he passed away, his entire library was dillied out. And we have, one of the things that I treasure, and I never met him, but I treasure, are all of the sermon notes that he had prepared, and they're in this binder.
You're still using it.
I'm going to preach, no. I've got a lifetime of them, yeah. But those things that we can pass on, Bibles, rings, things of value that have a meaning. Now, when I left and went to college, my mom, like the year after I left, she boxed up everything I had at the house and handed it to me. Get this out of my house, you know. And so we shouldn't keep on things like all of the stuff that gets hung on the refrigerator. You know, okay, yeah, those are cute for a while. We don't need to hang on to all that stuff. There's stuff that we do need to hang on to, and there's stuff that we do need to pass on. Some of the questions that I put on there, just for prompting, and these are things for you to take away and think about. What would fall under the description of things that are being passed down? So we've talked a little bit about that. But the next one, for what do you want to be remembered? When someone is going to come along and they say, you know what, I remember Bill at some point. What do you want them to be saying? It goes along with the very last question there. If they had the complete freedom to share truthfully, what would people say about you at your funeral? I've been in a lot of funerals. And I've been in a lot of funerals where when I'm sitting there, I'm shaking my head going, this isn't the person I knew. Right? I don't want to be the one that is said. I want to be the one that when things are said, it's because I've passed on to others that which is worth passing on. Yeah, Bill.
Can I have a show of hands in here? How many of us are parents in here? Okay. I get to thinking, and Bonnie and I talk about this, that the greatest thing I'd like to pass on to my children would be my belief in Jesus Christ, and that I was a Christian. And I have trouble with my son Andy, who does not know the Lord yet. Fortunately, my younger daughter does know him, but I just think that as us parents, if we know the Lord, maybe that could be the nicest thing we could pass on.
Yeah. We're going to talk about some of that in just a second. Because we always think about, what do I want to leave people? And I've talked with some people that they work their entire life to be able to leave their children with an inheritance, right? We're going to talk about that a little bit. Is that's valuable? Yes. That's important.
I don't think an inheritance is a legacy.
That's right. That's right. But unfortunately, people lump it there. And they say, my legacy is going to be what I leave them. You know what? Everything that we have here is going to eventually burn or disintegrate. And what are we going to really leave people? I want to take a look at some of the verses at the bottom there. So some passages just that will prompt our thinking. 1 Timothy 4:12. This is my life verse. Anybody know it? In this class, we should be able to have people just spell verses off, right? 1 Timothy 4:12. Let no one look down on you because you are young, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself to be an example of those who believe. Why would I bring that up when we're talking about a legacy? Well, the young people have their entire life to build a legacy. But I don't think any of us should live in a manner where anyone looks down on us. Or anybody takes a look at you and says, you know what? The worst thing I think somebody could say about me would be, if that's what Jesus Christ is, I don't want anything to do with that. That's the worst thing that somebody could say. And so, it talks about, I think there's 5 things in there: speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. And we're supposed to live in a manner that does what in regards to those things? It says, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself to be an example of those who believe. How many of you have relatives that when you were younger, and they were older, they were in that last third or toward the end of their life, and you were younger, you thought, that is the meanest person that I've ever met. Right? Or other thoughts that come to mind. What are some other things that would be this negative, somebody that ended their life not well? And maybe you can't say it, Bill. I know you've got a smile on your face. So.
I think we can think of that from classmates in our reunions. Some that liked to party in high school,
Yep,
and they were still like that at the reunions.
They never grew up.
Hasn't changed.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it can be either that they've never really grown up and done anything, or somehow when they get older, they just start to get angry, they feel threatened, right? Bitter. There's no peace. There's a lot of fearfulness.
When my grandmother passed away, she lived in Wisconsin, and I was willing to put together a funeral and put together some treats and whatever. She was in a nursing home for a long time, but my mother, my aunts, and their two brothers said they didn't want anything to do with the funeral, because this woman was so mean to them, and I am probably the only person this woman actually loved. So that was very hard for me to let them not do a service. I believe in dignity for everyone, regardless of who you were on earth. But that was a huge impact on me. And my aunt and my mother clearly told me, we're her kids, you're just the grandkids. And, you know, so that was very painful for me.
Yeah. So as we're talking about ourselves aging, or if we did, where I am, my parents are in that last portion of their life. Start to think about how do we want to be remembered. And it's never too late to be able to leave a legacy until after you're in the ground. Let me say that again. It's never too late to leave a legacy until after you're in the ground. If you've got whatever time left, that can speak volumes to people, more than a lifetime that preceded it. So whether it's ending well, or all of a sudden in the last years you get bitter, those are going to be the things that people remember. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, this was referred to or alluded to earlier. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Anybody got that one memorized? My fingers aren't working, so we didn't know here. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated next to the throne of God. How does that apply to what we're talking about? Since we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, now in this passage, the witnesses actually are those who've gone before, right? But you can actually think about it this way too. When you're in that last third of your life, you're surrounded by witnesses who are coming after you. Since we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which entangles us or clings closely to us. We've got to be able to release things. Another thing that I found, and this was with my grandfather. My grandfather, how many of you know the television show that used to be on All in the Family?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I grew up, Mom and Dad sat around, we watched All in the Family. I couldn't figure out why until later. Archie Bunker was my grandfather. My dad's father, that's just the epitome of it. You know, that's who he was. He had some interesting things that he used to do. And there's only one person in our family that really could break that shell, and that was my younger sister. She wouldn't let him be mean, she'd just crawl up on his lap. But I still remember when he died, a few things that happened. They only had two sons, and my dad and his brother. And when he died, they had to take care of his estate. And here's what happened. My grandfather was a machinist. He made his money during World War II making rivets. So he went from machine work to just making rivets for production work. He had a great machine shop, and when you went in, everything was leather belt driven. Some of you that are familiar with some of that. So each machine had a leather belt that came down to to a pulley system, and it ran it. The week after his funeral, when we were there cleaning things out, my dad went in and says, watch this, and he flipped a switch and everything turned on. It was still functioning. So he had a mill and he had all these drill presses, everything would run off of it. You just go and push an arm in and it would activate that leather belt and all this. But the other thing that happened was, you walked in order to get to that room, you had to walk through about 2.5 feet of aluminum cans that were crushed all over the floor. He used to go out and walk the streets and gather cans and come and scatter them all over the floor. And then he'd walk on it. And it was, I don't know if it was an alarm system, I don't know what it was. Okay, that was a shop. And the shop was packed so full of stuff, you couldn't tell what he had. Then he went into the house. Grandma did a good job of keeping the house upstairs clean. And you went downstairs. And it wasn't until they started to dig in and get the house ready for sale. I don't know why they did it, but they went into the, I don't know if they're cleaning the ductwork for the furnace. They opened up the ductwork and found boxes of money that he had hidden in his ductwork. In the ductwork. It's not a mattress, it's a ductwork. And then after he died, they were helping. My grandmother was still alive for a while. Yeah, but here's the other thing. After he died, they were helping my grandma try and put his finances in order. He had accounts that were hidden all over the place that nobody knew about. So my grandfather was this hoarder. He was fearful, protecting of everything he had, held on to it with just tight grips, and he was closed-mouthed about it.
And probably not very trusting.
No, not at all. Now, he had no faith.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part about it. But how do we want to leave for those that come behind us and those that see? Yeah.
Pat will never complain about it. After you heard that story. I just moved and I didn't get rid of it.
Do you notice where they're both sitting today?
Okay, but I also want to say, I want to remind you, I mean, that was kind of my dad, and then there was a Depression generation.
Yes.
There's a reason for it. Not that it was a valid reason, but you can understand where it came from.
That's right. My Danny's mom still hangs her Ziploc bags out on the line to dry them after she washes them. But here's what we need to realize. It's all going to burn. It doesn't, however much value we put in it, it doesn't matter. But, what are they going to remember us by? Take a look at the next one, 2 Timothy 4:7. You know when you grab a Bible that you're not used to?
I have fought the good fight,
Yes.
I have finished the race, I have kept the faith.
And this one ties into the last one we just read in Hebrews. And it says, this is Paul at the very end, or Timothy at the very end. Paul's speaking to Timothy at the very end. He says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race. How do you want to finish? What do you want to see happen?
The verse before that is actually something that sometimes when we memorize verses we skip the key verse, but I think the verse before this one is actually something that we should strive for as far as leaving a legacy. For I am now ready. How many of us can actually say, for I am now ready to be offered at the time of my departure is at hand? And we'll follow that up with, I have fought the good fight. How many of us can say, I am now ready because I have fought the good fight?
And then follow it up with a.
Yes, exactly.
Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. You know, if we have the faith, we have the ability to leave with others things of value, because we know what the value is of where we're going. On the next page, we're going to skip some of the head a little bit here. because Matthew passed, I didn't put the one reference in there, sorry, but the other one in Matthew is, I believe, the one about storing up for yourself treasures. So, just a couple of questions that I wanted to roll out to you as we're looking at this. The first question is to whom will your legacy be left? And I want you to think through, in your mind, whom around you. Who around you can benefit from knowing you and benefit from this last portion here of your life. We're encouraging Danny's mom right now, who she lives alone. She's still in her own home. She still drives. She's, I think she and Ruth are the same age. And up until last year, she still drove up to Minnesota on her own to visit us. But we're encouraging her, start thinking now about what you want to see happen with your things. Don't make us go through your things and determine what needs to happen. But to whom will you leave your legacy? It could be children, grandchildren. It could be neighbors, co-workers. God's going to lay on your heart the people that He wants you to make a difference with.
Another thing is places you can bring these things to, or families that are in need.
That's right.
To find a place, so don't think it's wasteful, it can be helpful for somebody else if it's in good shape and use it.
Right. And so as far as the material aspects of our life, I would encourage people, start now to downsize. Why do we need all this? I'm looking at it for us. And I'm hopefully saying that I'm not in that last third of my life yet. But for Danny and I, let's look at the house, let's clean out, let's give it away if we don't need it, if we're not using it. And so that can be a part of it. That's that generosity aspect. So the building of the character traits first is the most important. Then as you think about that, not only whom will you leave things to, but what will you leave for them? And I put down 4 areas there. We talked about all of them so far. Material resources, first of all. You're not going to take it with you, so you may as well find a way that others can benefit from it, right? So what material resources? Here's the thing I would encourage people with, and even with us talking with my parents and Danny's mom at this point. The greatest financial resource that you can leave anyone is do not leave this earth in debt. I don't care if my mom and dad pass away and leave me a penny. But it is going to be such a blessing to know that they aren't going to leave us in debt to try and cover up. Why? Debt that's left is actually a sin that's passed on to the next generation. So as you're thinking about this last third, clean up the sin.
I guess Lois got the same question, but then I think I was hearing the end of your sentence. It's not so much whether or not the child would have to pay the debt that the parent left, but the child has to know that the parent left a debt that was.
Gotta deal with it.
There's 2 aspects of it. There's the aspect of the character. And what are you doing, and what are you telling people with how you live and how you lead? I don't know the answer to what that is. I think that initially that has to be taken out of the estate. Then I don't know what happens if it is an exorbitant amount from what the estate is worth. I don't know the answer to that. Bob?
One other comment on debt. If you leave a big mess to be cleaned up, somebody else is going to do it. My great-great-grandfather homesteaded in western Minnesota, and it was passed down to 2 generations, and when my dad died, they sold it. Well, I don't think any of those, my grandparents ever threw away anything. And I was a one-man show that spent a year going out there on a Friday night, working Friday night, all day Saturday, and then I drive back to the Twin Cities, and this is in South Dakota border. And I did that for the better part of a year. And every building, we started in the middle, and I worked to the walls, and as you got down out by the walls, it got really interesting what all we found, but it's just profound. I mean, just the sheer volume of stuff that they kept.
You know, and I know you, Bob, and you approached that, I know, with a heart that was pure and it was good. Not everyone that's gonna be left in that situation is gonna end up like that. And so material things, I would encourage people, downsides, do what you need, figure out ways to give it to people that you want people to value it, and don't leave it in a situation where it's gonna cause others.
The first verse you read, it struck me, and I've never seen this before, that, throw off the weight and the sin. That's the relationship with the amount of, okay, we're Americans, the amount of stuff that we have as Americans. I mean, most people look at it like, holy cow. I mean, even me, I have tons of stuff, and I realize, but what is that relationship between our stuff and our sin? Are we gripping onto things, or are we, like that book on contentment? It's interesting. Are we content with just letting it go? If we hold on to it, I just had to move, and things that I really want later, but I'm like, I just gave them away to other people, and the other people were just so overjoyed. I mean, I almost feel like that's a treasure to me, the joy of the other people. And now it's stuff.
Yeah. Think of it this way. If everything that you own, everything that you have is in one building, and that building burns down tonight, it's gone. Everything. What of what you own are you going to miss?
Photographs.
Yeah,
Okay. When you can answer that question, those are the things that you need to be able to hold and leave for someone else. Not hold on to, but hold and leave. Everything else is just extra. I want to move on, I've limited time with you here on this, but material resources is only one aspect. But because we're so earthbound, that's where our minds go, right? Character traits. What do you want people to remember you about in regards to how you treat them? How you love them, yes?
Over the years, our daughter once in a while sends me a letter of appreciation for the support I've given her. I've always believed in her and some things she does, and the life somewhat I don't approve of, but I approve of her because she's my daughter and I love her. And in one letter she told me, and this sounds like bragging, she says, I have never remembered you saying bad things about people. And I hadn't really realized that and hadn't done it on purpose.
Right.
But it made me humble and proud at the same time that she had noticed that.
What a great thing to have somebody remember, that you've never said an unkind word to someone, about someone else.
Though I sometimes think them.
But she doesn't remember that. So, character traits. And as you're going through this, as you're helping others to go through this, discussing with people, talking about what do I really want people to remember me for? What is it that I would like to see different as I go forward? Faith. We've talked about that already, that the importance of passing on of faith. I mean, scripturally, we see it. That not only is faith positively passed on, but sins are passed on. The effects of sins are passed on to generations that follow. And so how do we live a life of faith all the way to the end? The one challenge that I would issue is that faith needs to be something that is continually transforming. I've never arrived until I'm there. I'm with Him. And so I'm continually asking God, what are you doing to transform and to change? If I get to the point where I'm saying, I just want to stay here, I'm comfortable, I just want things the way I want them spiritually, He's not stretching. One of the greatest ways that you can pour onto others in regards to faith is be that person that is stepping out and saying, I want others to hear and to know. One of the greatest resources is when people move into retirement, because the time factor that you have. It's one of the greatest untapped resources that we have. and you say, well, I'm not a good speaker, you know, or I stumble over my words, or, you know anybody else that had that issue? His name was Moses or Jeremiah. Moses, you know, specifically, God, I can't be the one to speak. How big is our God? We're going to talk about this in the service to follow, so I don't want to give that away, but, you know, God's bigger than anything that you can give up as an excuse. Yeah.
One of my granddaughters said to me one day, she said, you know what, Grandma, I love you so much because you always, and she, you know how little kids do, or young kids do, always tell us about Jesus. And I thought, wow, she cared about that. You know, and then I give them a lot of scripture. I've done a better job with my grandchildren, I think I've said this before, than with my own children. I'm having them memorizing scripture and things like that. And then they know, and I'll say, when I die, you know where I'm going to be, you guys. I'm going to be with Jesus, and I'll be waiting for you. That's the most important thing. And what song do I want at my funeral? We know, Grandma, what a day that will be when my Jesus I will see. And you know, that kind of thing. I just love that. And my grandkids and I have that bond more than my children and I, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I mean, my children and I, that too, but not as...
That leads us to the next one, family heritage. Because faith is something that individually I can lead. Family heritage is something that goes back. I can tell you I don't know a lot about my mom's and dad's side of our family. But what can I do to help my kids discover that and know that? There is a heritage there. And yes, it has ugliness there. But God is bigger than the ugliness. And we can learn from the past. And they can value things from the past. And so things like passing on of pictures, passing on of, now you can actually have it all put into a digital format and you know, they'll play it at your funeral for you. There's all these awesome ways to pass on things. One of the things that we talked about was I think it was you that brought it up, Pat, this guy that on your gravestone.
Oh, yeah.
On your gravestone there's a code that you can read.
Pastor Al Nauman, who's a free church pastor here in the Twin Cities, has an organization called memoryvision.tv. You can look it up on the web. And he will come to your house, he'll record your testimony, he'll put in any significant documents, anything like that. And then it will be implanted in a chip right on your gravestone. So anybody at any point in the future can just come along, scan it with your phone, a QR code, and pull it up.
Or in a few generations, they'll stick their hand in front of it because they'll be mounted. You know,
Yeah.
But there's ways. We are not trapped right now by things. We can find out information. We can share that information in a variety of things. And if you're saying, well, I'm not savvy with that stuff, there are other people that are willing to walk alongside of it. Or for those of me like my parents, helping my parents understand, how do you pass on to us who our family is? Sitting down and just recording them. Sitting down and just recording them, a conversation with them that can be passed on to them. And there's simple things that can be done to pass on a heritage. And right now, the younger generation may not value that, but there's a point at which they are going to wish they had it.
Yeah. Oral history like that is really significant. Many of us don't consider ourselves writers. We aren't going to write an autobiography, anything like that. But if we can sit down in front of a TV camera or even an audio recorder and just record our testimony or what we thought was valuable and put that down, it can be conserved then.
Yeah. I would tell you, we sat down, we did this a little bit with Bob and Shirley just a few weeks ago. Angie Johnson has taken our video camera that we're using in here. She set it up in her room, and I just sat down and I just talked with them about their journey and what's happened in the last few years. Tell us your story. Angie is looking for people here at Crosspoint that want to tell their stories. And then she's going to find ways to be able to incorporate that into our body life here as a church. I'd encourage you, go up to her. She's waiting for people to come. go up to her and say, can I come in and just tell you my story sometime? And she'll video it, she'll edit it. Yes, Rick?
If you're anxious about being filmed, there's an exercise we did with some of the small groups called life mapping. You can actually draw your map, use old pictures, put it up there, and that's a way to tell your story.
You know, I
And
didn't
leave
even think
behind
about that. That's a wonderful way to leave a legacy as well.
It's a written record. You have to be on camera that way, and you can add to it along the way. And some have done that and really thrilled about passing it on to their kids.
And then you could take that tool as a resource. You could sit down with your family over at Thanksgiving or Christmas, something where they got the gathering together, family gathering, and share with them.
A handbook called Life Mapping is in our library if you want to take a look at it.
All right.
Or you can do slideshows.
Yeah.
Slideshow?
Like a PowerPoint slideshow, yeah. I've got a question here on the middle of.
Before you go through, Mike, before you go through, you just passed on a very good point for all of us. Thanks to you, Tom. As we are older people, we don't have the technological knowledge that our kids have. And I thought you had a brilliant idea about, it could be left with a chip on our headstone.
Yep.
And I think that's a terrific idea. Like you're saying, we could develop this by having somebody record us, or even record video, and this could all be put onto a chip and passed on. I think that's a wonderful idea.
I think one of the ways that you can work through this is when you're getting together and gathering with people and you're talking, you're sitting around your, how many of you gather up with some friends and you have coffee every once in a while? All right? Rather than just sit there and talk about whatever, focus the conversation. How are you leaving a legacy for those that come behind? How can we help each other to do that? And turn that into a time that's productive in regards to where you're going, and you have a passion for that. I got a question in the middle of the page here I want to bring to you. So I'm probably not going to hit everything that was here, but I wanted to hit this. There's a difference between spending and investing. Right? Spending is you're putting the money out there, you're losing. Investing is you're gaining. And how are you investing in your future and the future of those that come after you? If God were to grant you blank years to live, how would you invest them in order to leave your legacy to others? Some of us it may be years, some of us we don't know. Maybe it's months, days, or moments. But how do I invest what I have left so that when I stand before him, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And then I have, where are you going to focus? Relationally, materially, spiritually, emotionally? How are you going to pass on to others? Pastor Gill?
Yeah, I can relate to all those areas that you're talking about. But when I first read that comment, that question that you put down, I thought that's where I am right now. Because after 20 plus years of, 40 years of pastoral ministry and 20 years of serving at the home where I currently live, now I have been granted X number of years to live there, and I'm investing them in the people and the opportunity that I have to develop further relationships and even to deepen the relationship I have with my wife who works there. I mean, this is a perfect question for me, and thank you.
And in the next few weeks, we had 2 weeks left on this. We were talking about some of the more practical aspects of how do you tie things up. And then I think the last week we're doing the open discussion. So you can think about some of the questions you have and stuff on that. Also, I'm willing to meet with you and talk with you if you want to dig into more how you do this. If you want to develop a plan on making the last years as valuable as you can. I encourage you to think of ways that you can serve here. We've got needs in both nursery and preschool right now. We like to hold babies like I do. We've got another 2 or 3 babies going to be born next year here. We're had a bunch that were born last year. We had 14 babies in the nursery 2 weeks ago. We've had, I can't remember how many down in preschool, but it was anywhere from between 12 and 18 in preschool during the worship service. And that's a great thing that's going to be coming up through Crosspoint. A great reality that we're going to experience. So, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. He's going to hit the highlights for next week, and I'm going to go get ready for the worship service. Like I said, if you have any questions or want to follow up with this portion of it, I'm more than willing to meet and talk. And I've got some books that I'll leave on the back table for you to take a peek at, and I can make sure that they get into the library as well.
Okay, thanks. So, if you'll turn to the last few pages there, you'll see a whole long list of questions. And I've titled it Major Life Decisions, Questions to Think About for Week 5. Now, if you look through that, you're going to quickly realize it's going to be impossible to talk about all of that in a 45-minute time. So I really, really want to encourage you, please go through this yourself. I would love it if you would send me an email or a text. I'll give you my address and number. Is there a... Because I really would like it if you would just send me an email or a text with a bunch of numbers on it of the questions you would really most like for us to discuss. In other words, if you really want number 3, number 7, number 12, number whatever, that would be fine. That would help guide our discussion. I'll tell you a little secret. This thing is just about one of them.
Gee, I would not have known.
So all I'm asking is, send me your choice of the numbers you'd really like to have us talk about. And we'll try to cover some of that, and this is going to be really open discussion. It's possible if we don't get through it all next week, that might flow into the final week as well. Because this is just a lot of stuff that is significant. There's at least 34 questions there, and then there's a number of ethical and pastoral issues and so forth. And in a 6-week course like this, we can't possibly cover it all. But these are things that I think probably could be significant for a bunch of us, things that we'd like to talk about. So that's what that's the direction we're going for next week, and then into the following week, which is more of an open forum, and we'll talk about a number of things that are of interest or questions you may have too. Any question or observation on that? Or okay, so let's close in prayer, and we're really glad you were here today. Father in heaven, thanks so much for these very important ideas about legacy, ideas about what we can leave to people behind us. Help us to not just put this stuff in our Bible and forget about it and toss it in the wastebasket when we get home, but help us to really reflect on this and ponder it and take steps as we go forward to help us to leave a really good legacy for our children, our grandchildren, and those coming behind, and not just in immediate family, but for our church and for our friends, a legacy that will reflect and bring glory to your name. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.